On today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers show, a special guest and myself, yours truly, go through the top storylines for the Pittsburgh Steelers heading into the 2024 season. But let's pay some bills first. Today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. They'll take care of all of your gambling needs this NFL season. And while it's not quite football season, we're all getting to training camp here in a week or so. There's still baseball, golf, soccer, UFC, MMA. If you have live odds, player props, over-unders, betonline.ag is the place to do it. Head over to the website today to get in on the action. Use our code BLEAV, that's BLEAV. You can see that on your screen right now for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here. Welcome into the Bleav in Steelers show. My name is Mark Bergin. Very, very excited to be joined by friend of the show, Joey Christopoulos of Sports Talk Chicago. Joey, welcome aboard. You know plenty about Justin Fields, so I thought who better to have on to discuss the top storylines for the Pittsburgh Steelers heading into this season. But good to see you, my friend.
Mark, great to see you. Happy training camp week. We're not talking about national hot dog eating contests. We're not talking about the MLB trade deadline. We're talking about NFL football, Mark. It's back. It's here. Excited to be on with you. Let's get after it.
Yeah, I'm fired up. And Joey, we were talking a little bit before the pod for the top storylines heading into the 2024 season for the Steelers. I'm going to give you first pick. We're going to go back and forth. Just have a spirited discussion here on today's show. But the first pick is yours, and the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, so I'm going to go a little bit off the board. I might surprise some folks here. This might be a little bit more of like an NBA draft where like anybody, I can talk myself into any top storyline. But I'm going to phrase it like this. Everybody knows I think the top storyline is going to be Russell Wilson versus Justin Fields, at least for the first half of training camp. But I want to call this top storyline is the Pittsburgh Steelers red zone offense, Mark. This is what I want to know about, okay? Because, look, I think this is what's going to separate those two quarterbacks in the end of the day and who's probably going to be playing in December, who's going to be playing, hopefully maybe in January for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look, if you want to pull up some statistics, they aren't going to be pretty about the Pittsburgh Steelers offense last year, obviously with two different quarterbacks under center. They were 29th in the NFL with red zone attempts at 2.5 per game. 29th in the NFL in red zone touchdowns per game. Steelers, just for a frame of reference, that's 1.2 red zone touchdowns per game. The 49ers had 2.6, over double those numbers. Only 13 pass touchdowns last season. Now, look, I'm just really curious to see, does this give perhaps a leg up for Justin Fields to see the field at some point for the Pittsburgh Steelers in this new red zone? Do they commit to the running game that they've talked about a little bit more? And when you go to the veteran like Russell Wilson, he's got a Super Bowl championship ring. He's been to 2 Super Bowls. You look at his numbers last year, they're solid, right? I don't know if I would call them impressive. In the red zone last year, 60% completion percentage, 20 touchdowns, 1 interception, but only 3.9 yards per attempt. Mm-hmm. That kind of stretches itself out to the rest of his offensive game at this point in his career. He's kind of in that 6 to 6.5 yards per attempt area. Is that check down, Charlie? Is that enough to get the Pittsburgh Steelers offense going? So I just think they really need to, when they get those opportunities, they got to start capitalizing when they get down in that particular area. And I think training camp is going to be a little bit, you're going to see some of those crumbs to see, are the Pittsburgh Steelers and their offense, are they going to take a step forward? That first step, Mark, for me, starts in the red zone.
Fascinating. And I think this connects to so many different things that we'll talk about here in the draft of quarterback battle. Najee Harris in a contract season, Pat Freiermuth in a contract season, who should be a red zone target. What does this offense look like with Arthur Smith in year one? And you're going to have success if you can put a touchdown on the board versus, okay, all Steelers fans know that you can go to Chris Boswell and he'll knock 3 through pretty much every time. But if you actually want to get back to that playoff success, something the Steelers haven't had since January of 2017, scoring touchdowns and not settling for field goals is going to be a key part of that.
Absolutely. And take a look outside the division. Who are you competing against? And what are their red zone options too as well? You got Lamar Jackson. We all know his favorite target, Mark Andrews. They're both dynamite in the red zone. You look at a guy like Joe Burrow coming back from injury. He's got plenty of weapons with a guy like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And then the Cleveland Browns. I know Amari Cooper had a really solid season last year. What does Nick Chubb and Jamel Ford do? I mean, these all have pieces that sound like to me that they're going to be able to have success in that particular area. I just think this has been a bugaboo for the Steelers the last several years, going back to the Ben Roethlisberger era of even if they get a drive going, even if they matriculate the ball down the field, can they punch it in for 6? I mean, the difference between 3 and 6, I know we're talking math here right now. So everybody get your thinking caps on. I just think for the Pittsburgh Steelers, this is going to be huge this year. I know we're going to get to the other side of the ball. We're going to get to be who's going to throw on those passes. I just think if they can just improve somehow from the 25th, 29th categories that you saw them post from the red zone in those categories last year in the NFL, if you can get me to 15 to 18, I think you see a market improvement and you see more wins on the board for the Steelers.
I want to talk about the lack of just solid quarterback play really since Ben's end here in a second. I'm going to go to my pick, Joey, and it is the quarterback battle. It's an obvious choice. The question I want to ask you is, if you look at, you talk to most Steelers fans, most people know that Russell Wilson's going to be the starter, barring injury, barring an absolute train wreck to start the 2024 season. BetOnline, the presenting sponsor of the show, has him at -1,000 to be the starter for week 1. Justin Fields at +550. The question I ask you, though, Joey, isn't so much the quarterback battle, but which of these guys at the end of the season is starting for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
See, that's where I think it gets complicated, right? Where if you are saying to yourself, I think over the offseason, I think you heard some language from the front office that you haven't heard from a Pittsburgh Steelers front office in a while. I'm going to be paraphrasing, but it's time, right? It's time to make a move. It's time to not just get into the playoffs, but become a contender again, win a playoff game, and move it forward from there. So with that being said, if you're telling me right now, who do you walk into this year with week 1? Who gives you the best shot? It's Russell Wilson from the get-go. I mean, the veteran knows where to get the ball and knows how to get the ball out. He's a guy that you can trust. I just think with Justin Fields, even if you started with him tomorrow, I think the learning curve for him will probably be pretty steep. And I think you would see a different quarterback week 1 than you would see week 6. Do the Pittsburgh Steelers have the luxury to wait that long on a quarterback? I don't think they do, Mark. And they, as you said, they've been so thirsty and starved for just competent play at the quarterback position. Only 13 passing touchdowns last year. I mean, come on. It's ridiculous. It's embarrassing.
Kenny Pickett only had 6, Joey, and everyone wants to run Mitch Trubisky out of town, and understandably so. Trubisky, when he was in a Bears uniform, did that in one game. In one game.
Right. Now, so it's a tale of two halves, right? So the first half, I think if you want to get off to a good start, I think you absolutely have to go to Russell Wilson if healthy, because I think he gives you the best competitive advantage to win some games early on in the year. But Mark, what gets so fascinating and probably what gets complicated about it is that week 7, week 8, does Russell Wilson's play continue to ascend, or does it crest and kind of sort of level off in this? Okay, it's great. But what are we looking at here? 210 passing yards a game, 1 or 2 passing touchdowns a game. I mean, that is only just kind of maybe a 10% mark up from the type of quarterback play that the Steelers already saw last year. Now, with Justin Fields, I'm not saying that he's going to throw for 300 yards, but the dude can combine for, with his legs and his arm, 250 to 290. Now we're talking more cumulative offense going into the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're adding more of a dynamic in your backfield with the 2 guys, Warren and Harris, with Justin Fields back there. Justin Fields in the red zone, I think, gives you some more options for Arthur Smith to be more creative. So I'm just kind of curious to see how this plays out. Barring injury, I think you give Russell Wilson every single chance in the world to have success. But I think there is going to come a point where the Steelers should probably take a look at Justin Fields. And I'm wondering, Mark, I'll throw this back at you. Do you think they have the appetite, even early on in the season, to throw Justin Fields out there for some snaps, almost in that Taysom Hill kind of style, give you a different look? Are we going to see Russell Wilson playing a dummy wide receiver slot role on the outside and Justin Fields come in? Do you think that's something that they're even considering right now? Or do you think they want to just kind of hit the ground running with the meat and potatoes?
I think the meat and the potatoes to start the year, because here's why, Joey, and you do a great job with Sports Talk Chicago on this. It's the trade back to Chicago, to where if he plays, what is it, fewer than 51% of the offensive snaps, just that is, it'll be a 6th-round pick. If it's more than that, it'll be a 4th-round pick. It's that conditional pick. And that's where Omar Khan's done a tremendous job, because the Steelers are paying Russell Wilson and Justin Fields a combined, it's less than $5 million for the season.
Unbelievable.
So
Unbelievable.
That's where I look at that. But then it's also like, right now, everything's hunky-dory and everyone's getting along. What happens when it's like, hey, Fields is the guy now, and Russell Wilson, who's a future Hall of Fame quarterback, a 9-time Pro Bowler, a guy who should have 2 Super Bowl titles, has 1, to where he's then a backup and holding a clipboard, right? Like, what does that do to him, into the locker room, and everything that Russ brings to the table? Because look, that's cool when you're winning. When you're not, it rings hollow. And I look at what the players say when he was in Seattle, and it's like Geno Smith becomes the captain. You're like, well, Mark, every quarterback becomes the captain. And he's saying along the lines, it wasn't that difficult to win over the locker room. The writing's on the wall right there, to where, again, when you're having the highest level of success, it's cool. What happens when you're even just middle of the road, Joey? That's how the Steelers play the quarterback role. And then keeping this in mind as well, Joey, both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are only under contract for this season. So do we have to go through this whole process all over again next season when, hey, the incoming quarterback class with the rookies isn't nearly as good? And for the fact that the Steelers never bottom out either to get, say, even a top 10 pick.
And you're in the situation where if Russell Wilson or Justin Fields don't work out and you want to move on from both of them, let's just say all of a sudden now Kirk Cousins is back on the street. You sign him. Are you signing him a year or two too late? Because I know that's been a rumor in Pittsburgh for forever. And here's the other thing about Russell Wilson that Steelers fans maybe need to keep in mind is that when you look at the numbers again, solid, respectable numbers. I Bleav he threw for 26 touchdowns last year, high completion percentage. But here's the thing that I think I'm worried about, and this is why I'm saying I think Justin Fields maybe has a chance in the second half of the year to see the field. When you pull up some of the stuff here, these are some frustrating and scary numbers for Pittsburgh Steelers fans. When he has less than 2.5 seconds to throw, that means he gets it out, gets the ball out quickly. He completes 74% of his passes, and you're like, wow, that's pretty good. Yards per attempt, Mark, 5.9. Down in distance, when it is 3rd down, and it is 8 or more to go, 8 to 10 yards plus to go, his yards per attempt is 7.8. So what I'm saying is frustration city. You see this all the time with a veteran quarterback. You're at a 3rd and 9, and he throws a 6-yard pass, and you're short of the sticks, and you're punting the ball. Completed the pass, looks good on the back of the football card, but at the end of the day, the Steelers aren't moving the ball down the field. It's kind of that little stuff right there, those little details with a veteran quarterback like Russell Wilson, that I'm just kind of curious, does he still have it in him to take those shots down the field, to get the ball to George Pickens, to really kind of push and challenge opposing defenses, as opposed to constantly making the smart play and hopefully stacking up 4, 5, 6-yard gains, passing the ball, and that's why I think, rolling it over just a little bit, is that I think that the running game, I know we got new quarterbacks in here. It's exciting. We want to talk about them, but this is going to have to be a run-first football team. You saw what they did in the offseason with the offensive line. I think it's been a project that's been going on probably for the last 20 to 24 months. And I think now it's time to maybe see the fruits of that labor on the offensive line side of the ball. And what was it? I think Najee and Jalen, I think they combined for something like 1,800 rushing yards between the two of them last year. I think you need to put a 2 in front of that number. I think you got to get to 2,000 with those guys this year, because I think that's not only going to help the Pittsburgh Steelers score more points, but it's going to help Russell Wilson, a veteran, or a guy like Justin Fields, who this point has had mixed results in the NFL.
Before we go to your next pick, Joey, here's how I see this playing out. And let's eliminate any injuries from the start, right? If the Steelers are at least back in the playoffs, I heard our friend Dave Damashek talk about this on his podcast, where it's like the best case for the Steelers is like that Jaguars team with Blake Bortles, where you kind of hide the quarterback, play solid defense, and run the ball. That's kind of the ceiling I see with this team. So if that's the case in their playoff bound, Wilson will continue to start. If the season then gets lost and maybe Mike Tomlin has his first sub 500 season, then you turn all of your rocks over and say, hey, what do we have with Justin Fields? Again, injuries could play a factor. Performance could play a factor, but that's just kind of how I see that going, to where Wilson will be the guy for as long as the tires don't fall off. But if the season goes even sideways, let alone south, then maybe you see what you have with Justin Fields, because I do think that he's better than just a gadget quarterback. Like, I don't know if he's a guy who win you a Super Bowl, but like, Joey, we've seen a lot of bad Bears quarterbacks in our time. I don't hate watching Justin Fields play, and I'll land here. I get excited about the possibility of a read option play with Justin Fields and Najee Harris in the backfield, or Justin Fields and Jalen Warren in the backfield. Like, to make an opposing defense play an honest 11 on 11, it's how football is played in 2024 and beyond. That excites me.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think the conversation about Justin Fields has gone a little off the tracks just because of the circumstance that's been in Chicago. Like, let's be very clear for Pittsburgh Steelers fans that are curious. If the Chicago Bears didn't have the number 1 pick in this year's draft and the right to take Caleb Williams, and I would probably go as far as to say, maybe if they even had the number 2, number 3 pick, I think there might be a different story. If they didn't have the number 1 pick, Justin Fields would still be in Chicago. His 5th-year option would be picked up, and they would be rolling out there, and they'd be trying to see if he can, if he can turn the corner and make it happen. Justin Fields has had some really strong moments in games. I think the consistency has been a big issue with him. He has been known to put together 3, 4, 5 consecutive starts that have been very strong. I will say that his biggest problem has probably been in the fourth quarter of games. Just honestly hasn't played very well, has had some opportunities to kind of put his stamp on a Chicago Bears offense in that fourth quarter, put the team on his shoulders. At times has been unable to do it. But look, there's legit talent there. The dude has a fantastic arm. When he lets it go, it can go some places for sure. Whether he makes the decision to let go of that ball, whether he's seeing the field properly, is a different story. But the guy has a big arm, tons of talent, and what he can do with his legs, Mark, is legit. Okay. Now, when people see the big plays, the 60-yard runs, they think, okay, well, maybe it's kind of boom or bust. What Justin Fields does is that when he goes back there, he can honestly pick up 6 or 7 yards whenever he can. He can honestly break a pocket and break down a defense and break down the sightlines of linebackers as well as anyone I've ever seen. So when a quarterback can go out there and just break the pocket, break contain, and get 6 or 7 yards on any given play, it really does open up a lot of different possibilities for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what happened with the Chicago Bears was he'd get those 6 or 7 yards, and then the Bears would run the football, which kind of depressed his passing yards because he can kind of go out and get it whenever he wants to. It isn't so much of, well, Justin Fields can't throw the ball. It's sometimes that his skill with his legs is so good that you just decide to keep it on the ground because that's what's working. So I want Pittsburgh Steelers fans to still be optimistic about Justin Fields. In my personal opinion, though, I don't want this to sound like it's two sides of my mouth, but I think they have to start with Russell Wilson, the veteran, and try and run a little bit more of a traditional offense and see if they can score points on a consistent level with Russell Wilson. And then hope in September and October that works, right? If it's September and October, we're hearing those classic words from Mike Tomlin after a game. We needed to spark the offense in the second half, so we made a change. If you hear that in September and October, the season has gone sideways. I think if you hear that a little bit later in the year, I think you can still compete and be okay with Justin Fields in there. But, man, it is an interesting dynamic. And I'm telling you, I think Arthur Smith is going to be very tempted to give Justin Fields some looks at some point, September, October, whether it's red zone, who knows. But in what form, how many times, and what manner is yet to be seen.
All right, Joey, we've gotten 2 picks, and we're probably, almost 20 minutes in now. So we've got Steelers red zone, Steelers quarterback battle on a broad level. The third pick is yours for the top storylines for the Steelers heading into the season. Third pick is yours. What say you?
I'm gonna take one of yours here. I like this one a lot, and Mark, I think it's a trick question. Who is the wide receiver number 2 behind George Pickens for your Pittsburgh Steelers this year? I think this is a trick question. I would love to hear your answer, though.
I think it's Pat Freiermuth. And
I agree. He's not a wide receiver, and he is your wide receiver too, no doubt.
And I think it kind of bleeds into Freiermuth heading into a contract season, final year of his rookie deal. I know he's battled injuries, so that's part of it. Played in only 12 games a season ago. But the very first game where you fire Matt Canada, he lights up the Cincinnati Bengals. And it's like, well, where has this been in our offense? You want to get quarterbacks that are new to your system, acclimated to your system. Hey, who's going to be your best friend? A big target in Pat Freiermuth, who's a mismatch for linebackers, and he's too big for DBs. He can win one-on-one combat style catches. You have so many tight ends on this roster, a lot of depth at that position. I think Freiermuth is the guy who emerges yes, he might be a tight end on paper, but in reality, he's going to be the guy that's an integral part of this offense to complement George Pickens and to keep defenses honest.
I completely agree with you. I think it's going to be the tight end Freiermuth. I mean, I was honestly a little surprised when I was pulling up the roster and prepping for this yesterday with some of the options that they have at wide receiver. To be honest with you, these are not the days of yore when you're looking at the depth chart regarding wide receiver. Now, look, do I think Van Jefferson can make some plays for you? I do. Do I think players like Calvin Austin are, dart throws? Close your eyes and throw it at the board. We'll see what happens. I do. Roman Wilson, I think, is an interesting guy. But I think in general, I think with all rookies outside of probably running back and probably maybe offensive line, I think any rookie that's thrown to the wolves in the NFL, I think there is a learning curve. I think there is an adjustment period that's going to happen. So I'm just not anticipating, even from a fantasy football perspective, that Roman Wilson is going to see 9 to 10 targets in week 1 and become an integral part of the offense right away. Right now, I still think that he can possibly be a productive player for them, but I'm just saying it's probably going to be more of a week 4, week 5, week 6 thing, which brings us back to Freiermuth. Contract season. This is a guy that when he's healthy, I think he's easily a top 6 tight end in the NFL when he is healthy and when he's out there. And when you're talking about a guy like George Pickens, who's going to be prowling and, exploring the down and distance outside the numbers and across the sideline, he's so good in the sideline. I think for a guy like Russell Wilson and a guy like Justin Fields had a ton of credit with a ton of success with Cole Kmet. And you've seen Russell Wilson in Seattle in the past with the Will Disleys of the world. I think kind of hitting the meat of that field a little bit in the middle with the Pat Freiermuth, I think it's going to be a positive impact for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And look, I just love everything that you just mentioned about Pat Freiermuth's game. I completely agree with. And this is another guy that goes back to my top storyline for the Pittsburgh Steelers heading into training camp. This is a red zone threat. This is a guy on that 3rd and 9 where maybe he can get those couple extra yards if Russell Wilson throws short of the sticks. I think this is a guy who obviously is going to be hungry for a contract. So as of right now, wide receiver 2, Pat Freiermuth, that seems to be the guy.
And I think we'll see what happens with some of the other rosters, injuries, as you get into training camp and preseason. Omar Khan has been very aggressive as general manager. Could you go make a trade for Brandon Ayuk? Has been the rumor now for quite some time, but for what price? How much would you have to give up for what right now would be a 1-year rental? He's in the final year of his deal with the San Francisco 49ers. So you give them the benefit of the doubt there to say, okay, if you have depth at a certain position, could you go make a trade with another team? There's that. The point about Roman Wilson out of Michigan is the want to block. And I give the Steelers the benefit of the doubt of their ability to draft and develop receivers. And what I mean by that, it's like when you put the black and gold on as a receiver, Joey, it's almost like putting on the Superman cape, where even a guy like Chase Claypool can score 11 touchdowns as a rookie. And he's now bounced around with several different teams now. But it's like putting on that Superman cape to where those 11 touchdowns he scored as a rookie tie a Steelers franchise rookie record all time. And you think about all the great receivers and skill position players that the Steelers have had in the franchise's existence. So I do want to see what they have with him. Van Jefferson's a solid veteran. I also look at it from the standpoint. So like, that's the upside, right? The glass half empty perspective would be like, if we're playing Madden, George Pickens is the guy you're going to double on most plays. Who's winning those one-on-ones on the outside opposite George Pickens? And that's just a concern that I have right now as it stands with the Steelers offense.
Well, and you know what's awesome? Football is officially back, baby, because I get to say the phrase, who's going to take the top off the defense, Mark? Who's going to do it? Who's taking the top off of the defense? Is it Calvin Austin? I love that phrase. It's so good. Football's, I know. He's looking to the heavens right now, and he's thankful because football's back. Because I just said, who's going to take the top off the defense? Yeah, man, no, it's funny. It made me think, too, like you're in Carolina, too, right now. Is Deontay Johnson going to get hit in like week 1, and like in Superman 2, he looks down and he's like bleeding, and he's like, oh God, like all my powers have been zapped. Like poor Deontay Johnson having to go to Carolina. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm curious. I'm a little curious about the mix, and I think what we're kind of sort of we're rounding about it, right? We're kind of circling the wagons on this thing that this Pittsburgh Steelers offense needs to be efficient. They need to be efficient. When they get the looks, especially outside the numbers with George Pickens, they got to hit on those, right? They have to have a very productive, fertile running game with both the running backs to move the chains. They need to, when they get in the red zone, they need to capitalize. And unfortunately, I know it's an exciting time in Pittsburgh with 2 new quarterbacks there, but it also kind of lends itself to a notion of maybe the margins aren't as wide, you know what I mean, this Pittsburgh Steelers team this year, where they really need to go out there and they need to execute. They have a veteran quarterback to do it. They got a strong running game, great offensive line, and a clear-cut number 1 receiver. But I think what we're getting at here is I think efficiency is definitely going to be key for this team to succeed, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
All right, let me go to my next pick, Joey, and that is the playoff success or lack thereof. You're now getting closer and closer to a decade to where this team last won a playoff game. You can see it on your screen right now if you're watching Bleav in Steelers. January 15th, 2017 was the Steelers' last playoff win. And Mike Tomlin gets a contract extension through 2027. And this is where it's like he's been so successful that Devin Bush was his top highest draft pick, and the Steelers traded up to get him with the 10th pick, barely in the top 10. So, like, what does that look like with Tomlin under contract through 2027? Can he go back to just winning a playoff game? Like, yes, the standard with this franchise is Lombardis, Super Bowls. But to do that, you have to win a playoff game, 0 for 4 in your last 4 playoff appearances. And ultimately, like, we can talk till we're blue in the face. What this season comes down to, and really beyond this, is can you get back into contention? Not just sneaking into the playoffs as a 6 seed or a 7 seed, but going back and actually being a legit contender. I am pro Mike Tomlin. I think he's a victim of his own success in a lot of regards because he helps mask a lot of the deficiencies to where point blank period, Joey, this offense hasn't been good enough. So what does success look like this year? If the offense can even be average and your defense maybe goes from elite to very good as it gets older, but how can you actually go back to winning playoff games and competing in January and hopefully February? And we say the standard is the standard all the time in Pittsburgh. Yeah, that's the case, but you got to actually that case still applies, Joey, when it comes to playoff football with the Steelers franchise and organization. What say you though? What do you think about all of this?
Man, you've made so many great points, man. And look, I'm an outsider on this one, right? So I'm just trying to tell you what I see from the outside. And look, I've done a bunch of shows with you, man. I love Mike Tomlin so much. When he gets a contract extension, I weep because that means he will not be available for my team, the Chicago Bears, to possibly sign him. So having said that, though, I think you brought up such a great point where I'm actually going to do something very rare and be slightly critical of Mike Tomlin in this one aspect. You're right, man. I think he is a bit of a victim of his own hubris. And I think the Steelers as an organization, Steelers fans deserve better. I mean, let's just start there, right? I think the standard is the standard. I think is so impressive. I think the wins, especially the winning streak for Tomlin, has been so impressive. But at some point, pretty good isn't great. And I think Steelers fans deserve great. And you really start to have to ask yourself some questions of, what is it and why aren't we getting there? It isn't Mike Tomlin's fault that he's a 500 quarterback. And I'm sorry I'm going back to it again, but only 13 passing touchdowns last season. The Steelers only allowed 23 passing touchdowns last year on defense, which is a great number. Give me that number every single year, and I think from a team perspective, I can go to the playoffs. But when you are minus 10 in passing touchdowns and you're still 500, guys, can we close the gap? You know what I'm saying? Can we get, if you close that gap, and let's just say you take 5 off the board and you give me 30 points back, what does that look like in the grand scheme of things for a Pittsburgh Steelers team, playoffs and otherwise? 21st and third down conversion percentage, 25th in yards. I mean, the stuff goes on and on and on with this offense. And I think at times the front office has said to itself, well, we're the Pittsburgh Steelers. We can just draft Kenny Pickett, sit around and wait for him to mature and still win 8+ games and be okay. They try to do that. They still won 8+ games, and they swiftly are moving on from him because they quickly realized that he wasn't at that base level that you need to be a competitive football team in the NFL. And that is, you have to have a top 15 quarterback. I'm not saying you need to have a top 5 guy, but I'm saying you need at least a top 15 guy to be competitive in the NFL. Look no further than the Chicago Bears. So while I do have optimism about this experiment with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, there is still a part of me that says that the Pittsburgh Steelers went a little halfway on this one. And I'm curious to see how it plays out. Now, look, there's a lot of other things. I mean, I'm going to slightly grease the wheel to start to transition probably over to the defense for a second here, but obviously only 16 interceptions last year. 0 interceptions from Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Hang on. Hold that thought.
Hold that thought.
No. Because that's.
But I'll round it out on the playoffs and just finish it like this. It's like, you know what, being 500 and just making the playoffs is not good enough for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They need to be winning games and they need to be competitive deep into January. And I think right now what they've done from the quarterback position in the last 3 or 4 years is a disservice towards that goal. I'm a little dubious that this quarterback iteration right now is going to get you there. It is a step in the right direction, though. And they need to, at the end of the year, if neither of these guys is the real deal, you got to punt on it, and then you got to go in big on something. What that is, I don't know. Is it Dak Prescott? I do not know, right? Is it Kirk Cousins if Atlanta lets him go? I do not know.
Here's
or
the thing
jumping
with that,
up in the draft. It's a retread,
Joey,
I know.
If the guy is a free agent as a quarterback, he can be at best, a good quarterback, maybe above average, because if he was that good, the team that he was on would lock him up long term. So It's like that's to where I think you have to go to the draft and identify the guy and not miss. And that's the thing where I will defend Tomlin, into where Ben hung on too long. There was a year that the Steelers had, I can't remember if it was his second to last year or his last season, where Ben's making something like $30+ million, $38 million, and they're paying the entire offensive line $12 million. Think about how many players, how many left tackles in the league make $12 million per year alone, let alone your entire starting line. And there's no draft capital either. It's not like any of those guys are first or second round picks like you have now. And so you have Ben at the end of his career, who Hall of Fame player, probably on the Steelers Mount Rushmore. I get it. But then you bring in Trubisky and you think he's going to be a bridge quarterback. The one thing I'd say about Mitch is you could see right away, it was like, whoa, this is what, in terms of mobility, a quarterback's supposed to look like, something Ben had earlier on in his career, because Ben was just a sitting duck back there at the end of his career. The lack of mobility, just father time's undefeated. You then add the year where Mason Rudolph gets benched for Duck Hodges, who's an undrafted rookie and is not even starting in the CFL. Pickett clearly didn't work. Mason Rudolph was your best quarterback this last year. Who's your quarterback been if you're Mike Tomlin? That's my point.
No, it's a great point. And I'll be honest with you. I'm going to debate my own self. If you're talking about Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins as your options after this season, how many playoff wins do those guys have?
Oh man.
It's hard. It's hard. It's a hard thing to crack in the NFL. And I get it that we love to point to the Brock Purdy's of the world and say, look how easy it is. I'm telling you, man, it's not easy. Look what the Los Angeles Rams had to do with Jared Goff, give up a buttload of capital to get Matthew Stafford. I think it's worked out for both sides, but they didn't see Jared Goff maturing into the player that he was. Nobody did, right? So this isn't an easy exact science. I completely understand that, but I do feel like, as you've just illustrated, the last couple of seasons, I feel like the Pittsburgh Steelers have played it way too safe, and maybe with a little too much, a light air of arrogance of, hey, we're the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we can run these quarterbacks that you just named out there, and we'll be fine. I think they are at least recognizing that that's a blind spot. Good for them. And I do think that the arrow is pointing up with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. But, man, you have to be proactive, not reactive when it comes to this kind of stuff if you want to play deep into January.
All right. You said you wanted to go to defense, Joey. Do you want to do Minkah, or what's next for you?
So here's my thing with it is that when I watch the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, drink everybody. My wife is a Steelers fan, so I watch every single snap. Dude, TJ Watt, again, and I'm not going to do the speech where, you got to get to a Super Bowl in TJ Watt's prime because he's the best defensive player in the NFL. I still like him. I mean, if it's him and Myles Garrett, I don't know, man. I still think I'm taking a healthy TJ Watt. So sue me. That's where I land on that. So, you're just kind of going through your crunching the numbers. Look, it's a strong unit. It has been for several seasons. I still think, guys like Cam Heyward, obviously playing for a contract, hopefully have a little bit left in the tank. But I'm just kind of looking for a little bit more of a diversification of the portfolio this year. When you pull up the numbers a little bit, you got 19 sacks from TJ Watt. You got 7 from Alex Highsmith. Nobody else has 4 or more. They got 47 as a team. It takes a village. I totally get it. Can you give me one more guy that can perhaps be a threat in that particular area? We'll see. And then the other one that I just mentioned before was, I was shocked, to be honest with you, battled injuries last year, but 16 interceptions as a team, that's not Pittsburgh Steelers football. You got to get more than that. You got to get at least into the low 20s. If you want to help out an offense that we've been railing on for the last half hour, you got to get a little bit more turnovers, a little bit more short fields. Minkah Fitzpatrick, 0 interceptions last year, 17 in his career previously as a Steeler, and came up with a squadouche, a 0. We all know how that turns the tide and what that does confidence-wide for the Pittsburgh Steelers. 0 for Minkah. I was a little surprised about that. Obviously looking for a bounce back in that category. And when you're talking about defense with the Pittsburgh Steelers at this point, I guess it is the stars got to be stars, but are there other players, Mark, that are going to ascend and emerge that can maybe take this defense up another notch, dare I say?
Yeah, you kind of stepped on mine with the return of Minkah Ball, because in 2022, when Minkah Fitzpatrick had 6 interceptions, he was the Steelers' best offensive player, but on defense.
Yes. 100%.
So how do you get back to that? And you have to play him down in the box. A year ago, a lot of injuries in the secondary, but he can do it. That's not where you want him to be defensively. You want him to be that center fielder, that ball hawk. But that's a facet of his game that we didn't see a year ago. No turnovers for Minkah Fitzpatrick. That's unheard of as an all-pro safety in this league. I'm totally with you. I'm bullish on Keanu Benton this year, entering year 2. You bring Patrick Queen over from Baltimore. Who the other linebacker is besides him is a big question. I could choose that. But with this defense, TJ Watt's not getting any younger. You could say the same thing about Cam Heyward at the age of 35, Walter Payton Man of the Year, but a player where when Father Time's undefeated, his best days are likely behind him. And when he carries a $22.4 million cap hit for this season, If he was out on the street right now, the Steelers owe him $16 million this year. He's not getting anything close to that, Joey, if we're just being honest. Can the Steelers rework that contract if he wants to play beyond this season? And if the Steelers are going to be loyal, I hope the other agents are recognizing that fact, because I love Cam Heyward. This team is better when he is on the field. But to carry that cap hit at the age of 35, that's unprecedented, not just for a player of his age, but coming off a groin injury as well that really, really limited him this past season.
And just to kind of rope back to something that I mentioned in the beginning part of the pod, when you talk about a division that has players like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Amari Cooper and Zay Flowers, which is maybe more of a slot guy, I want to get your take a little bit on what are your expectations for Joey Porter Jr. this year? Mm-hmm. In my personal opinion, I feel like that the cornerback position has been a bit of a revolving door at times for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Do you think that they have a building block in Joey Porter Jr., and maybe that element, that ascension as a player, can also help guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick as well?
I do. At the same time, the depth concerns me at that position, Joey, because Cam Sutton has an 8-game suspension to start the season. It's probably going to be Dante Jackson opposite Joey Porter Jr. this coming season. I'm assuming you're going to put Joey Porter Jr. on a wide receiver 1, and he's going to be the shadow. He's going to just be trailing that receiver all over the field. I expect them to move him around to where with Joe Hayden, he was always parked on the left side of the defense because most quarterbacks are right-handed, right? And so they'd play a corner opposite him to where he was very adept at reading quarterback tendencies, again, because a lot of quarterbacks are right-handed in the NFL. But if Porter were to go down, what the heck are you doing at cornerback? And I'm not going to wish injury upon any player, but the lack of depth right now, and specifically about with the nickelback as well, is also a concern that I have, because the reason I like Cam Sutton coming back on a very cheap contract following he was arrested in a pretrial diversion program for domestic violence. The Lions cut him. You're paying him about $1 million this coming season. So that's nothing if you're the Steelers, but you're not going to get him back until week 10. And he can play inside and outside, which is rare. Not all guys can do that. What you do at the nickelback position, because look, most teams are going to be running 3 receiver sets, 4 receiver sets, 5 receiver sets in the modern NFL to get it out to the playmakers on the outside. You're not going to be in your base defense all that much. You're going to be in a lot of sub packages. I don't think that's talked about nearly enough. You're going to need strong corners. And in this division, you have really talented receivers that you need to maybe not eliminate. I don't think anyone can eliminate a guy like Jamar Chase, but at least neutralize.
Is it fair, and strike this down if I'm wrong, is it fair to say that the Steelers were kind of caught on their heels a little bit with this Cam Sutton news?
No, because they knew a suspension was going to come down. You figured it might be 4 games or 6 games. I would say no to that, Joey, because you knew a suspension of some sort was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, eight games is just, it's just a lot. It's just a lot of games.
Agreed.
I mean, you got to come up with a plan B, plan C. I guess the other thing about it too, when you talk about training camp, is there are a lot of typically talented veteran cornerbacks that do not break with teams. And I'm wondering if Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be involved in that type of market. And forgive me, I haven't looked it up, but just off the top of my head, I'm wondering, is Stephon Gilmore still? I think he's still on the market.
He is.
I don't
and
think
that's
he's
the
signed
thing
with
too,
the
though.
team. Yeah.
The thing right now with, because I think Dante Jackson, who was a starter in Carolina for years, you get him in the Deontay Johnson deal. I think he can be your starter to where you've got 2 solid players at the very least, and Joey Porter Jr. should continue to get better and better. But it's the lack of depth right now as the season starts. I'm like, who's your nickelback corner, 5 DBs on the field, or your slot corner? That to me is the bigger concern than someone playing on the outside. Now, again, if there's injury to either Porter or Jackson, that's where I'm like, crap, what happens? And you could say, well, just go after Patrick Peterson again, bring him back. A lot of this, Joey, is, hey, for what price? You know, the team was paying him more than $7 million a year, and he fills in as a safety when he can't quite cut it on the outside of, again, Father Time being undefeated for how long he's been in the league, more than a decade. But is a player like that going to want to play on the veteran minimum? The answer is probably not. Like, I think a guy like Stephon Gilmore or Patrick Peterson, they could have jobs if they really wanted it. But when you've played at an all-pro level and then to say, oh, you know what, we're just going to give you the league minimum for where you're at this phase in your career, that's why they're still free agents right now. That's just my opinion, Joey.
Yeah, I would have some skepticism with Patrick Peterson too as well. He just kind of sort of feels like, I don't know, that time where you kind of like open up your fridge and you're like, oh, I still have pizza in there. And you look at it and you're like, I think this pizza is still good. And you eat it, which was what last year they did with Patrick Peterson, and it worked. It was solid. It was fine. He's not the player that he used to be, but I think he filled in and provided a veteran presence in the secondary. But going back into that fridge 2 days after that, first look at the pizza and you're like, is this dead? And then 2 days later, you go back, don't eat the pizza 2 days later, right? You did it once, you rolled the dice once. Bringing it back again might be a little bit on the foolish side, in my opinion. Unless, of course, you are in a situation where your back's up against the wall depth-wise and you have to make a move. I would like to think there might be something better out there. But again, we'll see what happens with training camp. I think guys get cut all the time, can get moved to different situations and play roles. And I try and remember this all the time. And I talk with former Bears defensive end Corey Wooten about this all the time, is that, you know, the talent gap in the NFL is actually way smaller than people think. It really comes down to sometimes fit, structure, and opportunity, where guys can come in and fill roles and be positive influences on different teams, even when they play poorly on other or in different organizations. Sometimes it does come down to fit, so it'll be something to keep an eye on there.
We'll each do one more, Joey, as we start to wrap here on Bleav in Steelers. I'm going to go back to offense. And a lot was made when the Steelers did not pick up the fifth-year option for Najee Harris for the 2025 season. Would have been $6.6 million. You've got Arthur Smith in year one. You've got 2 first-round picks now with with Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, and then Dan Moore Jr. right now is your incumbent starter at left tackle. Do you move him? Do you move Broderick Jones over to left tackle, which is what you drafted him to do? But Najee Harris entering a contract season, psychologically, what that does for you to say, is he the guy? You like the two-headed monster in the backfield with Harris and Warren, but do they have success with that this season to where he can improve his yards per carry as a chain mover? Or do you say, hey, this will be the last year, and then you could get running backs a dime a dozen in this league for what the positional value is for running backs in the NFL? That's why I have Najee Harris entering a contract season. That's what I'll take here for Steelers' top storylines.
It will definitely be something to monitor. I don't know if I've gotten too much sun this summer, but as it stands right now, I just think this is probably his last year with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay. If I had to take a guess right now, that's what I'm thinking right now. Because a couple things about it. The first one is, what does it look like for him to get a contract extension, right? And let's just play with, I think, numbers right now, because I think as a guy in the locker room, as a teammate, I haven't seen any bumps in the road or anyone, talking down about Najee Harris. And there were times last year when the offense wasn't going well that he was one of the few guys that was trying to be outspoken about things are wrong here. We need to correct them. I kind of view that as leadership. I don't think that he was griping at all, even as he was losing carries to Jaylen Warren. I kind of liken his production style to that of Ezekiel Elliott, to be honest with you. I think they both fashion themselves as sort of similar type players, a guy that's going to kind of bruise you on the second level more than he's probably going to slash and evade you to get to that second level. Is he a guy that can turn the corner, turn it up, and give you that kind of speed? I am a little doubtful on that particular side of things. So for me, what a contract extension with the Pittsburgh Steelers would have to look like is, I'll be honest with you, I think he'd have to have 13 plus touchdowns this year. I think he'd honestly would have to get into that 13, 14, 15 type area. Similar to, I hate to say it, stuff that James Conner did several years back to probably even warrant them to continue this relationship between the Steelers and Harris. I'm a big Jaylen Warren fan personally.
Same.
I think he's the perfect kind of change of pace back. He's got a little bit more speed. He isn't afraid to hit somebody too as well. I think he's a guy who, if you look at the numbers, I think, what was it? Najee was at about 1,000. He was 700 plus. I mean, it was almost even Steven. I think you're going to see more of that this year, obviously, with Harris getting probably more of the touches on the short line situation in the red zone. So I'm just saying to myself, what does that look like? I mean, is he all of a sudden going to turn into Derrick Henry and run for 1,600 yards? No, he ain't going to do it, Mark. No,
he doesn't have the
So
top speed. He doesn't have the top end speed. And I like Najee. He stays healthy. He doesn't fumble the ball. I do think he's a leader in the locker room. He was the captain before Kenny Pickett came along. At the same time, too, when I see him run the football, Joey, and I understand he's not going to break off the 50, 60, 70-yard runs.
Ooh, little slow motion.
It's like he's stuck in first gear.
Yeah. His first step ain't great. It ain't great, Mark.
It's like he's stuck in a gear, and it's like, okay, like level up gears and it's just, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you know what's funny about it is that, you know who actually would be like perfect for the Pittsburgh Steelers is a runner like David Montgomery. A guy that once you give him the ball, he's shot out of a cannon, and he's plowing and he's punishing and he's relentless and he doesn't give up, and it's cold and it's snowing in the middle of December in Pittsburgh, and David Montgomery keeps chugging and keeps plugging along. Najee has some of that in him. I just don't see it really on a consistent basis, and I don't think he has it in him to warrant a contract extension. It's probably the perfect time for the Steelers to go back into the draft next year and try and find someone who has a little bit more of that electricity, maybe someone that can catch the ball out of the backfield a little bit, that Jahmyr Gibbs style, that Travis Etienne. I think that's something that the Steelers are probably going to want to look at, because we just did the quarterback conversation. And if you're going to be between a rock and a hard place, maybe in that particular area, where do you get elite pieces onto this offense as quick as you can? It might have to come from the running back position. And I don't think Najee Harris is an elite running back.
In his defense, his line has been terrible for pretty much his entire career with the Steelers. So I will say that on behalf of Najee. Joey, you have your last pick, top storylines as we start to wrap up here.
Top storylines for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I'm just gonna kind of go. I'm gonna kind of go general with this one, to be honest with you. I just think the AFC North is the best division in football. Okay. And I'm saying that where, look, I think a lot of people are pumping up the NFC North right now, and rightfully so, because I think the Lions perhaps could be on the doorstep of a Super Bowl. Green Bay Packers won a playoff game. And the Minnesota Vikings, while turning over their roster, have actually done a pretty good job of kind of getting their cap back in shape. They got a young quarterback, and they have the best wide receiver in the game. They could be heard from. And then there's this little thing coming down the tracks, the juggernaut called the Chicago Bears. That's for a different pod with a different header or whatever, for a different time. But I just think the AFC North is the best division in football. When you're saying that the Cincinnati Bengals finished in last year, and you're looking at
not going to happen again. That won't happen.
Not going to happen again. You look at the Cleveland Browns and their defense. I'm not buying them on offense. And then if you look at the Baltimore Ravens, who I do think are poised to take a bit of a step back, but I'm a little bit conflicted on that, where I feel like that their defense might be a tick worse than they were last year. But I love Zay Flowers, and I do think Derrick Henry might be poised to go on a revenge tour this year. He might have one more in him. He's only 29, folks. He ain't dead yet, right? So that combo in the backfield, Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, I think that's a potent force. So when you're talking about those three teams, and then you throw in a Pittsburgh Steelers team that I think has a ton of optimism, I think you can easily say that they're going to be substantially better on offense, which isn't saying much, but you know what I'm saying? Like, they are going to be substantially better on offense this year. I think that those division games are going to be crazy. I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to come down to tiebreakers. And I think you guys are going to be, I think there's going to be a lot of schedule watching come early December of, like, we need this team to beat this team and that. And, how does our conference record look up against their conference record? Because I think it's going to be incredibly close. And I do think the AFC North right now is the best division in the NFL.
Yeah, and the Steelers don't even have an AFC North division game until week 11 against the Ravens. So the whole front half of the year.
Same thing with the Bears. What is
crazy.
that?
It's crazy.
What is that?
Yeah, and keeping it in the division, this is a perfect segue. My last pick, Steelers, going to be, among the AFC North teams featured on in-season Hard Knocks. What does the season look like come December? So you got Hard Knocks for going into the year with your beloved Bears. We at least get to see a glimpse of the Steelers and then, again, the other teams in the division. I can't wait to see behind the scenes of what's it like behind enemy lines with Baltimore, with Cincinnati, with Cleveland. I'd imagine they'll have some of the episodes to where the teams are all playing each other. What does that look like? And you just get access you otherwise wouldn't have of like, are they going to feature Russell Wilson at that point? Do we learn more about George Pickens and kind of how he's a bit of a goof off the field? Like, I don't know what direction they'll go because I don't know how the season will go. But to get that behind the scenes look that you don't get otherwise is going to be fascinating to watch. So that would be my last pick, Joey.
That's a great one. I'll second that notion of storylines for this year with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Is the Russell Wilson and George Pickens combo is like something that like CBS like concocted to run as like a show on like Monday or Tuesday nights at like 8 p.m. Central, right? Like choir boy meets anime weirdo.
Can we say alleged choir boy? I feel like it's the perception.
That's fair. That's fair.
Okay. Hang on.
But
yeah,
like,
I mean, they describe him as an alien. They describe George Pickens as an alien. So
what's the plane ride like where like Russell's like high stepping down the aisles at the corner? It's just like George Pickens in that mask, watching anime. And I'm just kind of curious what those conversations are like. And look, I know that Russell Wilson in the public has a very, I feel like he's very conscious and almost borderline superficial about the way that he's viewed publicly.
Everything is very deliberate. Everything is very, very, very deliberate.
It's very coordinated. So I guess my thing would be is that I think, especially with Tomlin and a lot of these guys, I mean, even think of the characters that are on this Pittsburgh Steelers team that won't take any of that kind of BS. So, I mean, I think Russell Wilson has a lot to prove, I think, with this team personality-wise. I'm just kind of curious to see what those sideline interactions are like with Russell Wilson and George Pickens if he decides not to target him on maybe a 3rd and 7, or maybe there is an overthrow, or maybe there is a moment where, like all wide receivers, George Pickens is not he's not the only person to ever do this. He's not the Neil Armstrong of a wide receiver getting upset if he's not targeted during a particular part of the game. Kind of curious to see how those things kind of go back and forth as the season moves along.
The body language, Joey, and it was different when Mason Rudolph was in at quarterback compared to Pickett or Trubisky this past season. It just was. And it's a night and day difference too. Yeah,
no doubt. And then, I mean, having said that, are you ready to do 30 minutes on Paul Skeens right now? You ready?
Well, we're looking for the Steelers quarterback of the future. You just have to go down the road, PNC Park. They show him warming up in the outfield, throwing a football, and we know he has a cannon. Why not? Dual sport athlete. Let's make it happen. They went right across their facility to get Kenny Pickett. Just go across the street and go get Paul Skeens, your quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers for 2025. Let's have it. Let's make it happen. Can you
imagine him throwing 100-mile-an-hour two-seamers that like start at the hash mark in the middle of the field and then end up at the sideline?
I mean, to start the All-Star game is a rookie. That's just absolutely incredible. I mean, he has a bright future ahead.
And he looked great last night. And look, not getting in the weeds on this one, but obviously there's a lot of parity in the National League right now. The Pittsburgh Pirates, I think they're a game under 500. They got just as good a shot as anybody for that third wild card. So, I mean, hang tight. I mean, Pirates fans, they ain't going out. They're not buying at the deadline. That's not going to happen. But if Paul
Looks good in the
Skeens
black
pitching
and
in
gold,
October
man.
would be cool.
Looks good in the black and gold. I'm just saying.
Looks pretty good over there right now. The young kids are coming up and good things are happening. So, hey, you know, was I going to quote Angels in the outfield? Hey, it can happen.
I prefer the curb quote more. Joey Christopoulos, tell our listeners and viewers what you're doing over at Sports Talk Chicago. It has been an absolute pleasure, my friend.
Mark, man, thank you so much for having me on Bleav in Steelers. You can follow me at Joey Sports Guy. I am currently hosting over at the platform of Sports Talk Chicago, hosting for a lot of wonderful radio affiliates across the great state of Illinois with some guests. Football season is right around the corner. New episodes come out on Thursdays. I do a little bit of some ramp up with some quick hits on Mondays and Fridays. What to look for going into the weekend, winners and losers coming out of the weekend. And then on top of that, in about a month or so, Mark, diving right back into the Big Ten, my friend. College football is right around the corner. We are welcoming in a slew of Pac-12 teams to our wonderful Big Ten conference. So anyone watching this right now, please do follow me at Joey Sports Guy because we're going to be talking a lot of Penn State, a lot of Drew Aller. Hey, man, Penn State, out of the 4,000 teams that are in the Big Ten, Penn State continues to be firmly, I think, in that top 4, top 5 area. They got a great shot at that CFP 12 this year. So make sure you follow me there because I'm going to be doing some great content in about a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks.
Joey, you're the absolute best. Please give our guy Corey Wooten. Please tell him we say hello over here at Bleav in Steelers. He's Joey Christopoulos. Yeah. I am Mark Bergin. Thanks so much for watching another edition of the Bleav in Steelers show. Thanks to today's presenting sponsor, BetOnline.ag on Apple and Spotify. 5 stars, 5 stars only. Hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care. So long, everybody.
What's up, Mike?